Jim, it's so nice to be here with you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here.
Well, we have had a lot of talk this morning about critical minerals, defense industrial base, China versus US, and we're going to dive into all of that with you. So for those of you who don't know Jim, he is the CEO of MP Materials. MP owns and processes the only integrated rare earth mine in North America. You were founded in 2017. You took the company public in 2020. You have, won some DoD contracts. You're committed with GM, who's also here. You're building a magnet manufacturing facility in Texas. So you've got a lot of things going on, and we want to learn all about it. But I want to tell you guys how I met Jim. So it was last fall. And the China committee asked us to come up to New York and to do a tabletop exercise and to think about what are the economic deterrent options that we could use to sort of prevent a hot war between China and Taiwan. So we looked at a number of different sectors as a part of that exercise. And what we saw was that in the chip sector, for example, we were putting a lot of measures in place that would stop China from getting access to our most advanced technology. And so we sort of said, well, the chips are a little bit stacked in our favor there. But then when we look at the critical mineral sector as a whole, we see that China has the chips stacked in its favor. But what I found the most interesting about talking to you is that when we think about critical minerals, we have to think about each one individually. And this is something that we're hearing from everybody else here today. So when we look at rare earths, that's a little bit of a different story. And actually, we have the potential there through companies like yours to have a fully integrated domestic supply chain here in the US. And actually, that's your mission.
We're close.
Yeah.
This
is fantastic news. This is going to be a very optimistic panel, just if anybody's wondering. Before we get there, though, you have such an interesting background because you didn't come from a mining industry background. So tell us about that.
Sure. And well, thank you, Sarah. And I should start by saying thank you to Silverado, Maureen, and Dimitri. It's great to be here. And I'll also give a plug for the book. I read it cover to cover. It's excellent. I'm in it, so I guess I'm biased, but it is excellent. So I am totally an accidental industrialist, as I like to say. I was very happily running a hedge fund for about 15 years in Chicago, and I jokingly say unfortunately, but it was great. Came across the bonds of a company called Molycorp, which was the predecessor to Mountain Pass, and it was clear upon our initial review that it was headed to bankruptcy if you looked at the capital structure and some of what was going on there. And so when I looked at, on paper, the set of assets that they had and that they had spent $2 billion and where these bonds were, I was like, oh, this is great. This company's going to go bankrupt. The people behind me will figure out, Apollo was a big holder in the convert, and they'll figure out this thing. So I bought a bunch of the senior secured bonds at 40 cents on the dollar, and then it filed and went into free fall. And the next thing I knew, I was in a Delaware courthouse. The bonds that I'd paid 40 cents for were worth 2 cents and basically zero. And I was in shock. I jokingly say I made the mistake of visiting Mountain Pass and seeing all of the assets out there. And I couldn't believe, especially with electric vehicles and all the things that were happening out there, that this site was literally going to go into reclamation. I mean, this is a longer conversation. It probably could make a great series one day, but it was on the courthouse steps, and I just couldn't believe that we were going to just let this thing go. And there was a belief that the Chinese had destroyed this industry, and not a single financial or strategic buyer showed up. Essentially, and I'm fast forwarding, I'll keep this quick. This is, again, a longer saga. It was a 2-year bankruptcy situation, but we put together a plan and bought the assets out of bankruptcy, and it had 8 employees. It was in care and maintenance, and we essentially turned it around. We had a distressed busted chemical plant, effectively, and a startup at the same time. And we relaunched it, and now we have 700 employees today, and are a multi-billion-dollar public company, and it worked out. But so that's how I got into this. Oh, thank you.
It's truly remarkable, and I can say without hesitation, I've never talked to anybody who went from Chicago financial office to owner of a mining company. So you've got a.
Well, I hope it's inspiring for some others out there to do, because we need more of it.
Yes, I am sure. I am sure it is. Well, we had the distinct pleasure of coming out to visit just a couple of months ago and meeting with Matt and Ryan, and we've got a couple of pictures that we wanted to show. So the picture that you're seeing, I took with my iPhone, but it's so beautiful that it looks like a professional photo. And so this is the big open pit mine that we saw. We can go to the next one. So here we are. It was a very, very windy day, but we got a tour of the whole facility. We got to meet a lot of the employees, see sort of each stage of, from mining to the processing and everything that they're doing. It was fantastic. So we can go to the next one. And this is Dimitri, who had a great time. And I was telling Jim earlier that the visit for us really crystallized a lot of what we had just been sort of researching and reading about, but not really appreciating in a tangible form. So highly encourage any of you who have not been out to a mine to go out and visit Mountain Pass, because there's some amazing things that are happening there. So tell me, what were some of the things that surprised you the most when you took ownership of this business, and how did you sort of approach some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, given that wasn't your background?
Sure. Well, the thing, and by the way, one thing that you'll note from that picture, and it connects in, and actually I'll do another quick plug, because I thought Maureen's presentation this morning was outstanding, and it made me, I was sitting there watching it, and I was like, it was almost like one of those things where it's like, you're not alone. It was like, wow, this is, I could totally relate, and I really, hopefully that'll make its way around, because I think it's really important everyone sees that, and I think that every single one of these industries is different, but there are a lot of similar themes, and so that really beautifully laid it out, and I think the pictures show that, which is, there's a mine, and then there's a refinery, and what's unique about Mountain Pass is that this is, effectively a multi-billion-dollar chemical plant sitting next to an open pit mine. And I had thought, when I first kind of went into this, it's just sort of mining. You kind of pick some rocks up off the ground, you put them in a bag and ship it somewhere, and you have a nice profit margin. And this is, much more of like a specialty chemical. And then that's really the easy part, because then it goes from there to the next step where you have to take a refined product and metallize it and turn it into a magnet. And when we started digging in, I think what we did, and is actually probably a relevant lesson for others trying to tackle these issues in some of the other industries, but multi-billion-dollar supply chains don't move overnight. Like we had to think about capital structure, balance sheet, getting to the next side thoughtfully. Yep. And so what we did, and I think people on the outside, some criticized us for it, but there was really no other way, is we forward sold product into China. There was no other market. So we forward sold concentrate product into China to get the working capital, to hire people, to get this plant going. My view was, they can't move this thing to Beijing, right? This facility exists in California, and so we had to access the Chinese market before we could eventually become self-sufficient. And so we did that. And so I think there's probably so many tangents we could go, but I think the big lesson was taking it one step at a time. And just staying alive as a company, which was in the early few years was really treacherous. I mean, we were, in distress. There's a term, a chapter 22, where you go bankrupt a second time. An 11 and then another 11, and we were every day on the precipice of a 22 because we had no money in the account and we had to pay people, and it was very touch and go for the first couple of years. But by being able to sell a concentrated product, we were able to show that we could turn this thing around get to the capital markets, raise capital, and kind of go from there.
And it's so interesting too, because, a lot of people don't really know what we're even talking about when we talk about rare earth elements, right? So, probably a lot of people in this group know, but, if you go to a dinner party and you start talking about the REEs, people are like, I don't know. So tell us a little bit more. I mean, rare earth elements are needed in so many applications, whether you're talking about robotics or defense. Talk to us about, how you guys are thinking about it. What are the applications that you're focusing on now or in the future?
And this is such a great question to raise, because a lot of times, and we'll have this when we brief people in government or in industry or media, is that there's a rare earths, everyone kind of lumps it all in. They just think, people think of a periodic table and somehow it's all rare earths or critical minerals, and it's kind of all the same thing. And of course, every one has its own use case, and they all have slightly different dynamics as an industry. What I think is so unique about rare earths is this is not just, well, first off, what we really tell people, because people think, oh, you're in the batteries, like for EVs. Rare earths go into high-powered magnetics, efficient, high-powered, heat-resistant magnetics. And so they're actually, when it comes to EVs and hybrids, they're in the motor. So it doesn't matter your battery chemistry. If energy is going to some kind of electrified motion, the rare earth magnet is in that motor, so the battery chemistry could change, but you still need a rare earth magnet. But the bigger thing that separates us from some of the other critical materials is that this isn't just about the battery. This is also about robotics, drones, other defense technologies. And so having a rare earth magnetics capability in this country is not just a commercial national security issue, it's also a national security issue. And we can probably get into this, but you mentioned the word, and I think that this is really important, is robotics. Mm-hmm. When we went public in 2020, and check the transcripts, I was saying this and people kind of thought I was crazy. I said, we will see in the next probably 5 years severe disruption in Western OEMs, Western automakers, because the Chinese are not just upstream, they're very thoughtfully moving downstream. Yeah. And in 3 or 4, that's kind of obvious now, but a few years back, that wasn't so obvious. And now, of course, we see, Geely is about to sell which is Volvo, will sell a car that is basically a Model Y, but $8,000 cheaper, and that will be sold in the US without tariff this summer. The auto industry has its own challenges, and we're probably, too late in many respects, although we have to react and think about that issue. But humanoid robotics, it's early. And, we see major investments, whether it's Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos in the company, but Xi has come out and said that China, they want to dominate mass manufacturing of humanoid robotics in 2025. And so rare earth magnetics are more important to there's multiples the content in a robot than there is in an EV. And so I just want to put that out when we're trying to be forward thinking about some of these national security issues. Our niche in particular is really, really important when it comes to robotics, and we got to get that one right.
Couldn't agree more. You heard it here first, and next year we will include robotics in our slides. So talk a little bit about the market dynamics, because each mineral has its own market dynamic, whether it's in domestic market or in global markets, on the LME. Tell us a little bit about how that's looking for rare earths.
Sure. Well, our industry, was looking great a couple years ago while we were still sending 100% of our product into China. Prices were rising sort of with the market. We were generating a lot of profits. And then as we started commissioning Mountain Pass to turn a concentrated product into a refined product, the pricing collapsed. The pricing, the refined product is 90% in China, and so they essentially set the market price. And so as we started to demonstrate independence, the price collapse and the profitability downstream, essentially went to zero overnight. And so the lesson in our vertical, and I think obviously, as Maureen pointed out, the lesson in our vertical is if you're willing to feed Chinese industry, you may live, you may make profit. Yeah. But if you're going to demonstrate self-sufficiency, there are levers throughout the supply chain where we will kill you.
Yep.
And so that, I think fortunately, we're, given my hedge fund background and my co-founder is actually a former hedge fund manager, but a genius engineer. We've had this combination of sort of being able, he focuses on most of the engineering and, I do a lot of the finance stuff, but we've tried to set the company up. And I actually should also thank, GM has been a very forward-thinking partner as a foundational customer in our magnetics facility in Fort Worth, but we've always set up the capital structure to be, de-risked. So we have $1 billion of cash on our balance sheet, and so we'll be able to, and we are a low-cost producer, we'll be able to survive. But our ability to invest is very impaired because of the collapse in profitability in the space.
Well, and I think that's an excellent segue to, we have a lot of policymakers in this room. Last night we heard from, I think, 16 different U.S. government officials who are here across over a dozen agencies. And, by and large, everyone's talking about supply chains, about how we can create resiliency, how we can avoid, single sources of concentration, build out, national and economic security. So from your perspective, what are we getting right in the policy landscape in the U.S., and where are we falling short? Because I think this is the conversation that we can now take into some of our afternoon discussions, but would love to get your perspective. So you've got a captive audience.
Since we have a few minutes left, and I know I'm gonna I have to be really on time here, so I'll try to get succinct. I would summarize it to this, and since this audience is very well versed, here's the big takeaway. I think we all know that every single one of these verticals is different. Mm-hmm. And so we need to have focused industrial policy where we can actually not sort of step back and just view this as a grab bag politically of here are the 3 or 4 things we need to do to have an industry and compete against China, and everyone sort of chimes in with their, pork barrel piece of the legislation or whatever. We need to actually look at every single one of these verticals and figure out what is going on, because the Chinese have levers throughout the multiple pieces of the supply chain where the moment we focus on one thing, they can shift profitability. So it's kind of whack-a-mole. We're backward looking and they're forward thinking. And so we really need to be focused. And so actually a simple way to describe it, in our vertical at least, so I'll bring it down into rare earths. We've actually shown, we generated MP, we had nearly $400 million of adjusted EBITDA in 2022 when prices were normal. So we can be profitable, we can be an attractive, public company that we are, and so we can exist. There can be a private market. The moment we started we announced our GM deal. We built now the magnet factory, and we're going to be selling precursor magnetic products to GM this summer. Then everything changed as sort of our success became obvious to the Chinese. I do think we need to introduce the concept of industrial mutually assured destruction, where if we have to show success in each of these sectors. If we can have, the Chinese have a concept in the rare earth industry of national champions, right? The rare earth industry is just 2 companies. It's China Northern and China Southern, which is just called China Rare Earth Group. And so they actually lose money now. You see that, the financials are out there, but their stocks, nothing will collapse because everybody knows there's 2 champions. And so their existence is guaranteed. And so I think we need to demonstrate some kind of success in each of these verticals. So in ours, I think we've shown we can do all pieces of this supply chain to the extent, and this is self-serving, I admit, but to the extent that we are a national champion and we can pave the way, I think the supply chain can broaden out. But you actually have to prove concept before you just throw money at a bunch of companies. And so I think we need to combine, and there needs to be, in some areas it'll be more tariff quota type issues. In some areas it can be tax policy to incentivize companies to sort of let the best player win. But in other areas, we actually just need to prove concept, and we can't be so spread thin. And so I think combining those 3 things, sort of industrial mutually assured destruction, where if the Chinese believe we're going to have success in that space, they're not going to be fighting that economic war. And then if we use the other 2 levers, I think we can kind of attack each of these verticals to get some. And we don't need to have 100%, right? If we have a significant percentage or a material enough percentage that there can't be destruction on our side, then the free market can take over because there's no economic or political incentive for them to manipulate one piece of a market if there's plenty of slack for everyone else.
I think sounds like a pretty good formula for success. So,
I know we're a little bit over time, but
yeah,
just quick.
Sure.
Yeah. So, James, you host us at the mine, and one of the things I found really fascinating is that this is one of the few rare mines in the world where you don't have radioactive materials in the mine, right? So it is a completely clean facility because of the geology of that mine, and allows you to do processing without a lot of the environmental harms that you see across the world where rare earths are mined. But the other thing that I found so fascinating is that there's massive amounts of supply there, right, that can last this country for many, many decades. And, you know, I don't know if you're comfortable estimating this, but if we were to mine everything that we need for domestic consumption and process it at that facility, what is like ballpark number? You know, we're not going to hold you to it, but is that $100 billion? Is that $50 billion? Is it much less to make us completely independent of any imports of rare earths into this country and just relying on this only operating mine?
Excellent question. So, and you touched on two really important things that I think, first, let me just answer that, which is, this issue we hear of rare earths and all of this concern about this is a single-digit billion-dollar issue.
Single digits.
Single-digit billion-dollar issue.
We just spent $75 billion on the chips.
By the way,
this is single.
Yes, we've spent that money on crazy projects over the last decade. We've wasted the amount of money that we could spend to solve this issue for good. But by not being focused, we haven't solved the issue. We're close because now that we're making magnets, there's enough of an alternative that if we can just scale what we're doing, that alone is enough insurance. Now the challenge is, the Chinese are focused on us now, and they've doubled their magnetics capacity over the next couple of years. They're going to, and so will they just will they make us uneconomic so we won't be able to scale? But this is a single-digit billion-dollar issue in our vertical, which is just mind-boggling when you think about the amount of press that it gets and the amount of mention it gets. And I pinch myself, I'm in shock, because you'll hear it's sort of like AI, semiconductors, and then it's like rare earths, and it's like, those things are like trillion-dollar problems. This is a single-digit problem. We're close to crossing this one off the list for good. We just can't screw it up. I'm worried we're screwing it up a little bit. We can kind of talk about that. But really that, and then the last thing that you just mentioned earlier that I probably should have covered is this aspect of economic arbitrage where, we operate in California, we recycle water, we have dry tailings, there's all of these wonderful attributes we have, and every one of the customers, they say, oh, that's great, but do we get paid for that extra cost? Of course not. There are a lot of attributes that we have in operating here that, unfortunately, we're at a competitive disadvantage as well. Thanks.
Jim, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.